Ready to start.
Thank you, Dave.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me on that. I'm Chuck Offenburger. I'm a board member. I also do a little bit with the programming, helping Margaret Hamilton, our program director, who deserves a round of applause, actually. It couldn't be much tougher to be a program director than right now, or in the past year and a half, 2 years of all the times that we've had to shift gears and make changes, and we're still doing that, of course. Margaret's done a great job of being a steady hand and doing just that. I just became aware that there's a number of special guests in here today. You're all special guests, and thanks for coming. But I want to introduce somebody that just walked in a little bit ago that adds some history to this presentation today. Jack Donovan from Carroll, sitting right over here at the black shirt. Wave hand, Jack. He is the son of H.P. Donovan, who really was the founder of the Greene County Historical Society. For some of you older members who can remember that, your dad wound up over in Carroll, didn't he?
Pardon me?
Your dad wound up over in Carroll?
No. I've been in Carroll for 70,
Okay,
2, 3, 4 years.
great. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And his pal Dave Martin's with him from Carroll. No stranger over here. You've done a lot of music in this facility right here, haven't you?
A little bit.
Good. Country churches in Greene counties, past and present. I want to start into this by introducing everybody on our panel up here, and then I'm going to go into some general history about the country churches in Greene County, and then we'll be talking with each one of these about their specific churches. These are 4 churches that have special note and special meaning as we consider the country churches here, just because of the experiences, the different experiences each of these 4 churches have. So this is Andy Geisler of our Host Church here, St. Pat's on Cedar, Karen Lawton from the former Greenbrier United Methodist Church, Peg Simpey from Pleasant Hill Methodist, which is over by Squirrel Hollow Park, and then from Trinity Lutheran Church in Willow Township down in the southwest are Cheryl Bielenberg, Ruth and Cliff Jensen. So we welcome you and thanks for taking part and making time for us today to join us here. I realized in recent years that there are 2 ways to prove to yourself that Greene County is a whole lot bigger than most people think it is. One of those is to get on a bicycle and ride to every town in Greene County. I've done that. And secondly, get in a car and drive all the places around the county that were or are the site of country churches. You'll see most of the county. I've learned a ton doing both of those things over the years. The country churches have been my most recent project, and I've spent a good bit of the past month visiting the sites and researching the congregations. And I want to open today by saying there are 3 things I feel like I've learned from doing this. 1, I have a new appreciation for how spiritual or religious our pioneer population was here. 2nd, I have a new understanding of how religiously diverse Greene County was back in its first century, and it's probably even more so today than it was then. And 3rd, I learned that while country churches early on survived tornadoes, fires, floods, blizzards, what most of them could not survive were improved county roads and better and bigger farm equipment. Those 2 things made travel to towns much easier for everybody. And again, fewer farmers were required to live and work in the countryside, and that changed the whole sociology of rural Greene County and other rural areas in most of America. Now, I want to be a bit of a history nerd here for a minute, because I think it's important to tell you about my best sources for this program. Roger, you want to go to that second slide there? I believe this is, threw this in because I love it. This is the rosette window from the Greenbrier United Methodist Church, which Karen and her fellow congregation members at Greenbrier have donated to the museum in Jefferson. And we're going to be framing that up so it will be in a front window and you'll be able to see it from outside. So it's a beautiful rosette window. Not quite as big or grand as St. Pat's on the Cedars rosette windows up there, which is fantastic. Maybe Andy will tell us more about that. First, where this idea, next slide, rather, where this idea came from for this program was, first of all, from 8 hours of videotaped interviews I did in 2012 with this man, James H. Andrew of Jefferson, who that same year was officially recognized by the Greene County Board of Supervisors as our Mr. History in Greene County. Old Jim, as most of us call him, died in 2014 at the age of 93, but he knew and studied more Greene County history than probably anybody else who ever lived here. And he shared what he knew in 4 two-hour conversations with me on videotape. Time flew by when we did those interviews, probably because old Jim lived up to something he told me once we started talking, and that was this: that if you're going to be, I learned a long time ago that if you're going to be presenting history and you expect people to pay any attention to it, you better make it fun. Our Historical Society has adopted that as our inspiration for our programming and projects. Jim Andrews inspired this program in 2 direct ways. He told me when we talked that there was once a Christian Science church in the northern reaches of Greene County in the countryside, and that he'd just never been able to find out enough information about it. And 2, I learned later that sometime in the 1990s, Jim himself had presented a program he entitled Country Churches to this historical society when it had a meeting over at historic Pleasant Hill Church. And I found the DVD of that. Roger said that they have all this great stash of DVDs from past programs, and I found it. And so I reviewed it, and it was full of great information about country churches in Greene County, especially Pleasant Hill Church. Secondly, I used, I think it's important for you all to be reminded that we have these kind of resources. I used this great 2011 book, The Heritage of Greene County, Iowa, which a special committee put together. It's just a fantastic resource. It gets more precious all the time. Available, and you can check it out at our museum. And in that, here are a couple of things. Jim wrote a story in there based on his program that he done earlier. And here's his opening 2 paragraphs about country churches in Greene County. Country churches played an important part in the development of Greene County. An 1896 atlas shows the location of 20 churches which were constructed in the county. There were several more church groups which met in schoolhouses or homes, but never were able to build a church building. Here were the denominations represented among the 20 churches mentioned above. And again, this is in about 1896, 1900. 1 Presbyterian, 1 Baptist, 1 Christian Science in Section 5 of Dawson Township, 2 Catholic, 2 Fringe churches, 2 Lutheran, 2 United Brethren, 3 Christian churches, and 6 Methodist. Rural churches, all. Side note here, there were also Methodist churches in the towns of Edessa, Sheridan, Hayden, Dana, Grand Junction, Jefferson, Cooper, Ribby, and Scranton. Every town except Fargo, which had 2 churches of other denominations. So there was a total of 15 Methodist churches serving Greene County until about the time the 1900s began. I've often heard a figure that across the whole state of Iowa, there was once a high of 6,000 Methodist congregations in the state of Iowa. An amazing figure. The other sources that were invaluable to me in my research: 1, get the historical map. We have thousands of copies still at the museum. The historical map of Greene County, Iowa, which has all of the old churches marked on it and with directions on where they are and how to drive to them. I mean, you can easily find them on the map. So that's a great resource you can get. Another one is a very impressive early history book of Greene County, done in 1907. Excuse me. Past and Present Greene County, Iowa, by E.B. Stillman, who was the editor and publisher of the Jefferson Bee newspaper. And then there's this one, which I didn't know about. It's a loose-leaf notebook, Rural Churches of Greene County, completed in 1974 by Mildred Fuller. Anybody remember her? Mm-hmm. That she gifted it to the museum. Did you know her, Karen? Uh-huh. Did this come from Greene County Church?
Not that I know of.
Mildred Fuller, and she made it a gift to the museum that year in '74. And it's just got great little stories about all the country churches that she could put together in that time.
She lived in Greenbrier Township.
Did she? I think we may have gotten when you donated from the church.
Okay.
The final source I had, and probably the most fun, was when I'd been out for about 3 weeks or a month, pestering a good 20 or so people around the county to tell me all they know, or all they think they know, about our country churches in Greene County. That has been fun. We have some genuine characters in Greene County. As we start to talk about country churches, right to the next, one thing we need to get in mind, I don't know if you can make out these names from where you're sitting. This is just a map of the townships of Greene County. And I wanted this in this presentation just because it's good to think of, if you don't know where those are located already, it's just good to know where they are. Because when you start looking at country churches, many of them identify about what township they're in, so it's good to know that. So let's go from that to some general fun history. The following, what strikes me is, Roger didn't just flip into some of these extra churches here, just go slowly. Anybody recognize that one? Is that the Presbyterian Church? Yeah. So the 20th century Presbyterian Church, south of Jefferson on Highway 4, about 4 miles, I think, and then right on the corner. But these are just what struck me as some notable highlights about many of the country churches that once stood and served here. I think of their heyday in from about the 1880s to the 1950s, maybe. With just a few going on beyond that. But south of Scranton, this is just several of them. That's old St. Mary's Church in southern Franklin Township down by Jamaica. No longer there, part of the cemetery down there, the St. Mary's Cemetery. But let's go south of Scranton. There was an old Providence Church. And what a heritage this place had. And this is not atypical of what you find when you start looking into these churches. It started as a United Brethren Church, evolved to become a Methodist church, but at the same time, Seventh-day Adventists for a while were worshiping there on Saturday evenings. One of the fringe churches, we have two, sometimes known as Quaker churches. We had 2 of those in the county. One was just west of Peyton. The other was just north of Scranton. Both are gone now. West and just south of Cooper, there was a German Lutheran church. Again, west and just south. There was a German Lutheran church which met in what was known, I found, as the German schoolhouse. I had never heard of this. And there's a German cemetery there that now has the status of being a pioneer cemetery in Greene County, which means there's no longer active burials there, but it still stands and preserved somewhat by the county. And this one wasn't in the actual countryside, it was in the town of Scranton. And as long as we're talking about some of our ethnic heritage in our churches, I should mention that Scranton had one, the Danish Evangelical Lutheran Church. and still very accessible since the cemetery is active, as I mentioned, is that old St. Mary's Catholic Church about 4 miles southeast of Cooper, or 2 miles northwest of Jamaica. The parishioners and community members there all call it Little Ireland, and there's monuments down there, stones that tell the history of old St. Mary's down there. You understand why it's called Little Ireland when you stand and look at the names on all the gravestones that are there. It's like a roll call of the Emerald Isle out there. And again, that's now administered by the Franklin Township Board of Trustees. About straight west of Jefferson and halfway to Scranton, along the North Raccoon River, is the commemorative now Short Bend Christian Church. It's a model, not a scale model, but it's a smaller version of the log cabin that was originally built there to house that church. And the name Short Bend came because there was a short bend in the Raccoon River right nearby there. That church is the antecedent, or the predecessor, that's what I'm looking for, is the predecessor of Central Christian Church in Jefferson today. For Methodist south and east of Jefferson, south and east, there were 4 churches in what was called, at least for a time, as the Cooper Circuit, with all 4 served by one pastor who presumably rode a horse or piloted a horse and buggy between them, and that's why preachers back then were often called circuit riders. The 3 country Methodist churches in that Cooper Circuit were the Centennial Methodist, the Pioneer Methodist, and Pleasant Hill Methodist. And among the early churches in the county, as far as the earliest ones, they might be down in the Rippey area. Because before there was New Rippey, there was Old Rippey. And Hammonds, where is Old Rippey from the town of Rippey today? Where is it?
2 miles west and about a mile and a half south.
2 miles west and a mile and a half south. The town site moved as the railroad came, but
If you follow E57 around Fort Cooper, one of the intersections, there's a gravel road off to the right, half a mile is the cemetery, that's where the town is.
okay, so just off E57 down by the river, west of current Rippey. But in that area out there, a Church of Christ congregation began meeting long ago in the Gonder Schoolhouse, 6 miles southwest of Rippey today. And that later moved to the site in town. There was also a Methodist church serving Old Rippey as early as 1885. And northwest of there were the Pioneer Methodist that I mentioned earlier, and also Bethel, which I think is Bethel Methodist Church, but I'm not quite sure about that in that area. So some of those churches down there will go way, way back. Northeast of Sheridan, or northwest of Peyton, right up on the Greene County line with Webster County, stood the old Christ Lutheran Church, founded by the many settlers of German Lutheran heritage. After meeting in schools and homes for a few years, the congregation members built their first church in 1909. 9 years later, it was demolished by a tornado. The members rebuilt that same year, and that church served into the early 1960s when, through a combination with other Lutheran churches, closed. I learned that one of the founders of Christ Lutheran there was named Godber Karstensen, who was the grandfather of Evelyn Taylor, who lives in Jefferson today. And I found Mr. Karstensen's biography in the 1907 History of the County. And I want to quote you one passage from this. Not that it has so much to do with country churches, but it gives a great glimpse of what life was like in that early era when many of these churches were being built. Godber Karstensen was born in 1834 in Schleswig-Holstein, a province of Germany. And in 16, 17 more years. And in Clinton, the Karstensen parents passed away. But Godward was a young man then. I think he married over in Clinton County and decided it was time to move west. In 1875, with a team, cattle, and a few household goods, Godward Karstensen started for Woodbury County, Iowa. That's up by Sioux City. When he reached Greene County, however, his cattle gave out, and he was obliged to remain here, squatting on 80 acres of wild prairie. He built a board shanty, and in the winter banked it with sod to keep out the cold, for the country was still in its primitive condition, and the pioneers had to cope with hardships that can scarcely be realized by those who have not experienced it. I read that and I thought, wow, you just almost feel that wind blowing out there in the wintertime. He was a good, industrious farmer, though, and he grew his holdings to 160 acres in Greene County and 80 more acres across the line in Webster County, so he knew what he was doing. And now we come to the church that has perhaps most intrigued old Jim Andrew and me. The Christian Science Church that for a few years served on the east side of Section 5 of Dawson Township. It's about 4 miles northwest of Peyton, or about that same distance northeast of Jourdan. You got it up there, Roger?
What was it coming up?
Will it go to the picture, the next one?
I don't know there's no photo on it.
Oh, the pictures aren't coming up.
Pictures aren't coming up.
Well,
Back out's coming.
that's okay. I mentioned earlier there was an atlas done in 1896. It's a beautiful book. It's got color printing in it. Somebody really laid out a lot of money. And it shows, it has in essence, a plat book in it, or the plats in each of the townships. There it is, right here. So this is 1896, Dawson Township, right here, Section 5, kind of in the northwest part of that section, the northwest part of Dawson Township. And if you can look closely here, right there, there's a church, picture of the church with the cross. It's a little marking, and it says Christian Science Church on the land of August Karstensen. The Karstensen's name very well known up there. So that church was built and opened there by 1896. From my reading and what old Jim Andrew told me, it probably was built in about 1890, which is significant because the Christian Science religion, is anybody in here Christian Science? The Christian Science religion was founded in 1879 by Mary Baker Eddy in Boston, Massachusetts, and quickly became a church expanding across the country and really around the world. And as I looked at this, for a while I could not figure out, I couldn't find anybody's names that were directly associated with this church. And of course there's just really almost no records of it. And so I called the Christian Science Iowa headquarters in Des Moines, talked to a woman, Laura Wickloss, who's interested in history, and that's about the depth of her knowledge. But I said, was this even possible? Would the church that young have been sending people out to start congregations and build churches? And she said, well, from her understanding of the church history, absolutely. Because Mary Baker Eddy was summoning people who were interested in her spiritual theories to Boston, where she was training them. And then she'd send them out all over the country, and in fact all over the world, as missionaries. And she really was teaching them kind of the core of the Christian Science religion. She was teaching them about the healing powers of science, and that you might not need as much medicine as some might think you need, and a lot of this can be solved in prayer. So that was kind of the heart of this. And so, and she said that was somewhat typical, and then some of those churches, the ones that were in the cities, basically hung on, and then the ones that were out in the rural areas, basically, as people moved on, most of those faded in the rural areas. She went on, Mary Baker Eddy went on to found in 1907, she was 84 years old, and she founded the Christian Science Monitor, which is another way many people are aware of that religion. Solid newspaper, great newspaper, especially for international news, and still published today, mostly online. So that is a well-known church. So I kept digging in and hoping I could turn up a name. And so I published on Facebook the other day, I published that plaque right there showing the church. And Valerie Ogren, dear Valerie, also involved early on in the founding of the Greene County Historical Society, says, get Stillman's 1907 History of Greene County on page 385. There's a biography of Karsten Nansen, and read it. Having dealt with Valerie over the years, I immediately did just that. Went into the museum, got the 1907 history, and pulled it out and read it. And learned this. This will take me just a second. In the biography of Karsten Nansen, it winds up this way. In his political affiliation, Mr. Nansen is a Republican and has served as a school director, for he is a firm believer in the maintenance of good schools and the employment of competent teachers. He is a Christian Scientist in religious faith, and until just a few years ago, attended services near his home. But as nearly all the communicants moved away, the church was sold. He is recognized throughout the community as a man of genuine personal worth, a good neighbor, and a staunch friend, possessing many of the sterling traits of character for which the German race is noted. But a Christian Scientist. And so, as I found that name, and then I started looking further, I found my way to Bob Burnell, who I'll tell you just a bit more about. There he is right there living in that 1896 Atlas. He lives in Jefferson now. And I found my way to Ray Daggett, who's sitting right here in the second row. Ray Daggett lives in the home in Section 5, Dawson Township. That's either where the church stood or might be the church. We have a little bit of a disagreement between Ray Daggett and Bob Burnell. And both have long, good memories of this whole area. Ray's 84, Bob's 96. Remarkable memories. But, so, as I continued to probe about other people that might be involved in church, Bob Burnell sent me to Kathy Patchford Ornament from Jefferson, whose family kind of hailed from that area out there. And she's got a lot of genealogy, and she turned up one other name. So there is a landowner up there, you might see him on that earlier plat, named August Karstensen. August Karstensen, who was involved in the founding of Christ Lutheran Church, just next door. We talked about that, the one that got blown away by the tornado. So August Karstensen's founding the Christ Lutheran Church out there, but his wife, Mary Nansen Karstensen, is a member of the Christian Science Church and is involved in the little church out there. And Kathy Batchelor found in her obituary when Mary Nansen Karstensen died, it reported in the newspapers that because she was a member of this Christian Science Church, we won't know what didn't quite work. So there were at least a couple of people involved. So Bob Burnell actually came on the scene out there in about the 1960s. He bought land up in the north part of Section 5, and he was told that a two-story house that was there on that land, just sitting on the ground, had been moved. It had been the church down the road to the south. It had been moved across the road and to the north, and then established as a home. And various people had lived there over the years. And then in about, let's see, that was in the 60s, and sometime soon after that, Bob decided he had a family living there that was working for him, and he was worried about them facing storms, so he could raise the house, build a basement underneath it so they could get down and be protected there. And then as he did, he said that he thinks that two-story house was actually the old church building. Then it was added on the east side and the upper story. And he described the inside. Tom Schilling, who once lived there, his family said that inside it had wainscoting around it, and it appeared it might have been a church building. Not sure, just don't know. But that's the scene out there at Bob Burnell's place. So then I was trying to reach Ray Gagg, and who I called and couldn't get him, and then I found his cell phone number. But last Saturday, I drove out there, and there's his house. Beautiful place. And Ray believes that that is in fact the Christian Science Church, that it would have been just the vertical part of the house there that was the church building, and you can imagine that. He's got a picture with him here today of his two sisters. One of them is right here, Ida Jo, right? That when they were little girls standing in front of that one, it looked very much like a church building with three long windows on each side of this place. But as you can see, there have been additions added on both sides. And so, that's what we're left with. Ray can remember his grandfather, Francis Mullins, and his dad, Titus Daggett, telling him that had been the Christian Science Church, and they too were moving in over time. And did you put a basement in underneath that? Yeah, it has a basement underneath it. So it's real interesting, and I don't know, short of a wrestling match between Ray Daggett and Bob Burnell, I don't know where we're going to come down on this. But I took one step further on this, and that was I emailed the national headquarters. The woman from the Christian Science Church in Des Moines gave me the contacts for the lead archivist for the church in Boston at Mary Baker Eddy Library. And so I asked them out there to do some digging and see if they could come up on any more information about when that church existed and the people that were involved. But it's certainly an interesting chapter in the stories of small churches in rural Greene County. I hope to learn more about it as time goes on. Now, panelists, wake up. I wanted to bring in the life of these churches. You go through different stages, as we all can probably figure out, and there are different challenges that come in these different stages of life in these churches. And I wanted to talk to people here representing 4 churches that are of special note right now, at least in my mind here in Greene County. And I just want to have some conversations with them about stories that are involved in these churches and the history and what they've done to extend their lives or end their lives. So first, let's call on Andy Geisler, who's involved with the committee here at St. Pat's Cedar. And we thank you for hosting us again. This has become a favorite meeting place at the Greene County Historical Society. So it's always great fun coming up here. So Andy, thank you. Go ahead and take the mic and I'll ask you a few questions. St. Pat's Cedar. What is the Cedar? Is it Cedar Township?
Cedar Township.
Is there Cedar Creek?
There is Cedar Creek.
Where is it?
Cedar Creek is directly on this gravel road, you head north, first left, and there's a bridge right there, that's Cedar Creek.
Yeah.
And there's the first bridge that I think across Cedar Creek for that history. On the north side of the road was the lumber and the Pioneer store. So that was where our resources were at the time.
Was that as much of a town as ever grew up there?
Not a town, just a Pioneer stagecoach stop came through here, either crossed the Jensen farm or it went down this road there. I asked my mother, so I'm sixth generation descendant to St. Patrick's.
Wow.
And she passed away a year ago, 3 days short of her 101st birthday. So she told me, I said, well, how can you have two roads? She says, because it depends on the weather. Because there's muddy, and you went one way. If it wasn't, you went the other direction. And she described here the town of Sheridan, how to get to and from, which was a planned trip. Up here, 3 miles east, was planks on the dirt. And you drove your narrow Model A on the plank, and if you slipped off, good luck. So
You mentioned the stagecoach. Is this the same one that went all the way across the county? I'll bet it is.
yes.
So it went right through the Pleasant Hill property. Okay, that's amazing. So, quick history of St. Pat's. How far back do we go?
Basically, the pioneers, I'll take you back to 1854. The pioneers came and they found Cedar Creek. And that's the first 100 years. And 1872, there were enough people that moved here that they had so many families were Catholics, and they decided to build a church. So Miles Fitzpatrick and his wife Julia Fitzpatrick. I'll show you this. This is Julia Fitzpatrick. They are the ones that donated the land and then for this church and for the cemetery.
This is a tin type. How photography started out, a tin type.
Yeah. So in 1872, they built the first wood frame church directly on the railing of this ramp on the back of the church. And it's set on stone. So parishioners started growing, people kept coming to Cedar, and they decided that we need to build a new church. So in 1915, they tore down the wood church and they replaced it with the first brick mat church with the design by William LaBarre Steele, the architect, and it is what you're sitting in, the Renaissance Revival model. The windows are round and not Gothic, so that's part of it, the Renaissance period.
I don't want to cause more of a fight. I'm already working on Bob Burnell and Ray Daggett. But what's the difference between St. Patrick's Church, Cedar, and St. Columbkille's Church in Sheridan?
St. Patrick's was the first parish. Sheridan, St. Columbkille's was a mission. And then the two became parishes later on. So
Is there-
Sheridan is very German.
I was going to say, yeah.
And St. Pat's was obviously very Irish. So
What over the decades, how big did the congregation become? Do you have any sense of the numbers of?
you know, I don't. That's a good question.
Would there have been a few hundred? I'll bet there would have been.
Possibly. This church hall was always full when I came to church. Plus, I didn't get to look around backwards much. You don't look back in church when you're a kid. So I sat in the second pew right there with my grandmother. We didn't look backwards.
But traditions that developed around St. Patrick's Church over those decades.
Several noted things that you said make it fun for the church and the people in the program. You have to make it fun, and the way to make it fun is to tell real life stories on it. So one of those is Prohibition, and there's Tombstone out here that has a panel missing on it, and that's where you pick up the moonshine. So people say, no, you didn't do that. and we had Andy Buchanan across the way with the trees gone now. We're grown up, and she said, and yes, they do. So.
The St. Patrick's Day, big deal, always?
St. Patrick's is a very big deal for us here. I'll give you a quick one. In 1872, they built the church. 1915, they built the first brick church, Renaissance Revival. But St. Patrick's and Irish always had some kind of tragedy or disaster or something to deal with. So in 1919, lightning hit the steeple, caused damage to the bell. And we don't have a bell on the tower. We don't know where it came down, and people said that it was melted for war times or something like that. But we have no idea. It came down. In 1919, this church structure, these walls are all original. This used to be in a cruciform design. There was an entrance on the west, entrance on the east, and a rostrum, which is, some of you might know, is a lectern standing right here. I didn't know that until I started looking at history and started going, wow, history's pretty interesting, actually. Rostrum, who heard of a rostrum? Anyone heard of a rostrum before?
It's like a platform
Raised platform where you lecture off of and such. So it's Trinity Sunday Mass, and 2 o'clock. The old boys, I think, always get blamed for everything. Wine in the closet, can't be good wine that. Didn't put out the incense. Nobody knows exactly, but fire started, and by 2 o'clock, the church was totally in flames and was lost except for the walls that are standing here today in the basement. So the Germans in Sherdan had been coming out to St. Pat's, and St. Pat's Irish is like, now's the time. The priests got together and said, so should the German and the Irish. We'll build a church in between. The Irish said, I don't think so. And then one year, in 1919, the church burned. They were in Jefferson, they brought all the material, and by 1920, had finished this church that is standing today.
Wow.
So, you look at the room in the confessional back there, that's the original brick, and we didn't put the plaster back on it, so you can see the burn. And all the walls and basement you just came from, and those charred marks, those are all original walls, and they built back up. So this is 100 years old today, this building.
Wow. 100 years in this building? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this year.
So, what is this, when did this church go from being an active full-time parish to an oratory?
Well, the families were dwindling, and the diocese decided that they were going to close the churches. It's happening still, it was happening then. In 1992, they changed the St. Patrick's to oratory status. Oratory status means that they could have weddings and funerals, but you had to be a direct descendant to the original parishioners to have your funeral or such here. And we currently today, 29 years later, there is no money coming from the church diocese for oratories. All of the funding, all the resources, everything is from the community, and St. Patrick's is a place for the community to enjoy, for fellowship, for concerts, or whatever. And so
Do you still have a Mass on St. Patrick's Day?
We have some Mass on St. Patrick's. We have had 2 weddings, funeral, the last funeral was my mother here, and there was a baptism. So we do not have Saturday night, Sunday Masses, because it is oratory, that's a vigil time. But we can have Masses during the week, or at the discretion of the priest. And so...
So who runs this place? What's the group called?
St. Patrick's Committee, Historical Church Committee. We were established in 1992. Joe Nugent out there got the church on the National Historic Register. And you need to, if you have anything unique about your church that you want to get going, you need to be on the National Historic Register. It makes you eligible for grant programs. And the grant programs we've used here, I'll let you read that.
This is support historical resources, State Historical Society of Iowa, This project, partially funded by Resource Enhancement and Protection, REAP state funding Historical Resource Development Program.
So that's where the grant money comes from for historical restoration.
Can I ask, how much do you think you have financially put into this since 1992 on the whole committee?
And the total is quite sizable for the grants. I can tell you in 1992, the roof was a grant. That was $20,000 to put on the roof, so I was 29 years old. So we had shingles back then, but we don't have to replace it soon. The furnace, which is downstairs, is a torrid zone Linux furnace. And in 2014, we decommissioned it, and we got a total amount of $10,000 for the decommissioning of the Linux furnace because it was oil, gas, changeover to diesel for liver gas. And it is the only furnace, torrid zone Linux furnace in the nation that actually works. And so we decommissioned it. Johnny Shoemaker, a local here, he worked on keeping the fires burning for 30 years. I came back 10 years ago and inherited that, so this isn't going to work. Because the fuel was $800 a month through the fuel oil. And Linux, we got hold of them, and they said, you have a torrid zone Linux furnace that works. We don't have one. We don't even know one in the Marshalltown Museum. What are you doing with it? Our committee said, we're leaving it for display for anyone who wants to see. And Linux came forward and added another $10,000 and bought 2 5-ton air conditioning units out here. So first time since the church was built, we have now air conditioning. So we've done that. The rose window was in 2016. We got a grant for $5,500. We matched that, so the total rose window was $11,075. That is something you want to pay attention if you're finding out. We painted these walls, the committee, and when we were up there, we were thought, what a beautiful window. And we looked at the frame, and the frame was moving 3 inches one way and 3 inches the other way. And so we almost lost that window, the rose frame window, and the state historical has what's called an emergency grant. So anyone can apply for that. And we told them that our window, we don't know why it's still in the building, but it's swaying 6 inches in the wind. And they immediately jumped on board and helped us repair that window. So they're especially very interested with the workshop I went to in Eastern Iowa, which there is workshops for historical restoration of any buildings and such. And I learned there that pink glass is rare in stained glass windows. Red glass is made with gold, so that's one of the interesting parts of that. But pink, if you look around, there's not very many pink glass in stained windows. And when we look at this rose window, we're thrilled. So, with that, we're going to have the view there with the workshops. So, more reason to look forward. Well, the direct wind came from that direction, blew the windows out, threw shards of glass into the pews back there. We're sitting in the original pews, and we keep everything in safe access region as possible. You'll see that the Mars in the glass, that's where the Christians came in with their pliers in their pockets. All farmers have pliers in their pocket. And they pulled the shards of glass out, filled it in with putty, and our committee came along and we're going to fix this. But then we realized we were just almost destroyed history. So it is still original. Sometimes you can do a little too much restoration. So don't do that. Last year we had the straight line 60-mile-an-hour winds. Just before the weekend for the wedding was going to be happening here. These 2 windows, the pressure, the sealed glass on the outside, the pressure from the 60-mile-an-hour winds was so great it bowed in the glass and about 4 inches. And so it was hanging on these 2 windows over here. The pressure in the church was so intense that these 2 top glass windows boat out into the west. So we're like, we're in trouble. And we can afford to replace these kind of windows. And so our insurance for the diocese actually covered that. We tell the community what's happening, and we actually had a person just walk up and said, how much is your deductible? And $2,000 check was in my hand, and that was it.
Wow.
So the people love the church. That ended up being a total of $13,321.49. So that's the total. I don't know what the total dollar is, but the rest of it is from private donations.
Substantial, at any rate.
Yeah.
With grants from various agencies, right?
Right. But that rate is $2,000.
If you want to see St. Pat's at its zenith, really, there's an event here the first Sunday of December. What time in the afternoon?
It's December. We always have All Strings Attached. All Strings Attached has been coming here since 2014. We came up with an idea and wondered if people would like Christmas concerts here. First response I got was, no, they don't know. But it has been a full house since 2014, except for COVID. So
That's an orchestra and choir from Carroll.
Right.
Terrific. Karen Locke, let's talk about Greenbrier Church. It's on the other end of this discussion right now. Tell us what happened at Greenbrier.
Well, a lot, you mean in the last year?
Yeah.
Because a lot happened in Greenbrier over the years, but in the last year, we started having discussions, I guess, probably early in 2020, and by by July of 2020, we had decided that we were probably going to close, and in the end, decided also to tear the building down. There's a lot of debate.
How old was the church at this point?
Built in 1892.
And was this the original church building?
Yeah, most of it was.
Yeah.
There were some
Oh, it's been
additions.
added on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so
But it wasn't an easy decision, and it's still debatable whether that was right or wrong. And in the end, we had to tell ourselves, there is no right or wrong to this, it's what we decide. And so we didn't feel we could sustain it with a board of people who would consistently take care of it through the years. So the decision was made, like I said, right or wrong, to tear it down. It was torn down in March of 2021. We closed, our last service was December 27th, I believe, of 2020, and then it was closed or torn down in March of 2021.
and what's it going to be now? What's there?
We turned it over to the township trustees. A lot of negotiations, but the township trustees in Greenbrier agreed to take over the acre of land and take care of the mowing. And so we are in the process, the church congregation is in the process of putting together a memorial site there, which will probably include a small shelter house gazebo type setting with some signage and memorial pieces. And we're going to apply for some grants. We're going to apply for the Community Foundation grant for sure. So we're in the process right now of putting together the plan so that we can submit that. And so that's where we are with it. Yeah.
I have been to Greenbrier Church to hear Karen Lawton preach and play the organ, piano, lead the singing, I think. Tell us some of the traditions that grew up at Greenbrier Church you've spent your whole life as a member, right?
Yes, I'll be 64, and yeah, my parents lived there. My parents moved there in the early 50s, and so they didn't have ancestors that lived there, as most of the people. I mean, I found out when I was about 5 years old that everybody was related to everybody, and it's like, boy, don't talk about anybody because they're all related. I mean, they were all kind of descendants of, well, Nettie Bell, who was the Greenbrier schoolhouse teacher in 1892, gave the first $50, and she was the aunt of Grace Bryan and Frank Naylor, who were parishioners there until they passed away. So from there on, everybody married somebody that was related to somebody, and it just was, you know, a church full of relatives. So anyway, with some of the traditions that, you know, I can remember, the chicken dinners, I barely got in on the tail end of those, but I was reading some of our church history last night, and I saw a picture of it in 1955 of one of our chicken dinners, and there were, I think there were 400 some people there. They had served 400 some people. So, and in 1962, after the chicken dinners went away, those became, I think, too much for everybody. We started ice cream socials, and those, probably many of you went to those at some time or another out on the church lawn. And that started in 1962, and I'm not sure when that ended, but it ended, of course, because there were too few of us to put something like that on. One of the main, this almost kept our church from closing. Hanging at the Greenes was always a big Sunday at our church, and Susan Hoffman, bless her heart, our Christmas tree was filled with these red balls that were in memory of loved ones who had passed away. So this is just our family alone. We had 2 bags of these, and they filled our Christmas tree, and for some reason that was just one of the most special, most sentimental things to our church family. And you know, everybody said, oh, we can't give up the hanging of the Greenes. Well, we decided we'd all take our Christmas balls home and put them on our own trees. But that was a special Sunday. Christmas Eve was always special. The kids went up front and gave pieces. We did a Back to Bethlehem pageant. Toward the end of when we had children, I mean, we didn't have any children in the congregation anymore, really, and we had one little girl, I should say. But when my kids were growing up, we got to the point that we had so few kids. My son Lance and Bill Frederick had to take turns being Mary and Joseph. So one year Lance would have to be Mary, then the next year Bill Frederick would be Mary, but they got kind of a kick out of it actually. So that was fun. NYF was always fun. I found some old books where the NYF actually, they took minutes. This was back in the 50s, and I thought, they took minutes and they had little worship services, and I thought, well, that didn't sound like very much fun. But my parents took over that job of being the NYF counselors in probably 1960 or so. They had a lot of fun then. You know, they went to Springbrook, they went to Hyde Park and went sledding. They had hay rides, and in fact, my mother told a story about, a lot of the funny stories of our church revolved around Gene Blanche, and he was a character. And he was in NYF, and they were at Springbrook, and he took off rolling down an embankment, and he yelled back up and said, hey everybody, I'm a holy roller. So, it's just things like that. NYF was a lot of fun. Sunday school was fun. We had lots of Sunday school classes, Bible school, so Farm Bureau met there for many years. Greenbrier, of course, rural churches don't have a town, but Greenbrier was situated in between so many towns. I mean, even if your address was Bagley, or if your address was Baird, or if your address was Jefferson, you always said, I'm from Greenbrier. You never said the town that you were from. You always said Greenbrier, so. Anyway. Yeah, 4-H, we had all our 4-H meetings there. And in the end, after the little schoolhouse closed, it was our voting poll as well, so.
I noticed statue of St. Patrick right back here. If you look down at the base, St. Patrick's there's a snake there, plaster snake, because he drove the snakes out of Ireland. You needed him down at Greenbrier.
We perhaps were driven out by snakes. I'm not kidding, that probably contributed to the closure of our church. We really had a snake problem in the last 10 years, and probably more than that. Doug said my dad was taking snakes out of church long before he ever told anybody, so I'm sure that's true. But my mother was the best snake wrangler you could ever find. One of the first times that we knew that we had snakes was a bridal shower for Carol and Frederick. We had bridal showers for every one of our girls that went through the church. Well, somebody went in the bathroom and screamed. There was a snake in the toilet. And my mother said, "Oh, now calm down, everybody." And she went into the bathroom. I don't know what she did because I went the other direction, but she got that snake out and she got it outside, and I don't know what she did to it. And then one other time, quickly, was Maxine Watson's funeral. And Mother and Arlene Johnson had stayed back at the church to get the lunch ready while everybody else went into Jefferson to the funeral. And so Arlene came down the steps and she hollered and said, "Oh my gosh." And Mother said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Oh, there's a snake there." So Mother said, "Don't move, I'll take care of it." She said, and Arlene said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And Mother said, "Well, I'm going to stomp on it." And she said, "I just hope to God I hit the head and kill it on the first try." Well, she did. She stomped on it and killed the snake and took it outside. None of the rest of the women were that brave, but anyway, she was.
So, I mean, when it's been so much a part of your life, how do you feel? I mean, there's no right or wrong. You said, I think we'd all sense that that's where the truth is. But how do you feel when you give up something like that?
You had to make a conscious choice that you were going to find all the good in all the years that you spent there. And that's kind of what we spent the last 4 months doing. We focused on all the relationships that we built in the church the last 4 months. We talked a lot about it. We wrote messages about it. I gave a message one Sunday about the women in the church. That's a whole nother topic, but I swear to God, the women of our church kept it going. They were tough. And so you just focused on all the positive and knew that, like we said, there was no right or wrong. I thought a lot about my parents and what they'd be saying about this, but I decided, they never wanted anything to look anything but well kept and up to date, and I think they'd be okay with this. So we had to let it go, and we just vowed to stay friends with each other.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's a heartwarming story for sure. Yes. Good question. What are you going to do with all the records for the church?
The membership records are at the Jefferson. Our memberships all went to automatically were transferred to the Jefferson United Methodist Church per the conference regulations. Now, we can choose to go somewhere else, but for now, most of the memberships have gone there. Membership records are there. I have some historian books at my house. There is a Methodist archive that those will probably eventually go to.
We have, I always think that the county's kind of anchored by two very historic churches in similar positions as far as what their status is now as a church or congregation or event center or whatever. One is St. Pat's right here, tremendous place. The other is Pleasant Hill down by Squirrel Hollow Park, and Peg Simke is here today to represent Pleasant Hill. Are you the president still of the group? Tell us what that group is that runs Pleasant Hill.
Well, the group that runs Pleasant Hill now is called Pleasant Hill Memorial Corporation, and I think there are 5 of us on there now, and Wallace still, Wallace Teagarden is a big part of our corporation. He's 90-some years old now, but he does still anchor us. So we are a group of neighbors in the area. Some have old family ties, some don't. My husband and I were married there 28 years ago. That's our connection. And one of my neighbors, the minister that married she and her husband, he was familiar with the church and had family there. And some, just our newer folks. So there still is, it's amazing, the families that I see in the history of Pleasant Hill Memorial are still family names in the area.
When does it start and when did it quit being a full-time church?
So the gathering started, as has been said earlier, in the schoolhouses, and it actually started at Anderson Schoolhouse, which I cannot determine where that is. If anyone can tell me which of the schools was Anderson Schoolhouse, I'd love to know that. But the gathering got so big, and unlike the ones that were German or different, this was a mixture. These were Methodists, they were Baptists, they were just a mixture of 5 or 6 different religions that grew. So they did end up being a Methodist church. The cornerstone was laid in the fall of 1881, and the minister happened to be a carpenter. And by spring, they had the church done. Can you imagine that in those conditions in the winter in Iowa? But they had it done. And so they started in 1882. At one time, they had a YMCA there, they had YWCA, they had a softball team. There are pictures of them with floats in parades. It wasn't just a church, it was a community. And it was their social time, it was their friends, their family. It would take them, a long time to get there in a horse and a buggy, but they did. So that's, we're kind of trying to get back to that. To me, Pleasant Hill is it is a historical marker, but it also needs young people creating memories there now so that it will continue as a part of the community and not just a historical marker.
Did you say what year it ended being a church?
It did end in 1953, I believe. It ended in 1952. There were 31 members, half of whom were active. They did start Sunday school again for a few years after that with a big class of kids that got together, but then as soon as they graduated, then there were no more services.
Now, really, has the homecoming happened ever since then?
Every year except COVID that I can tell. I can't tell in any records that there had never not been a memorial
And this
service.
is, tell the folks what it is. It's Sunday of Memorial Weekend.
They call it homecoming, and it is the Sunday Memorial Weekend. They also have been, and we are continuing that, very dedicated to remembering the pioneers that came there, that founded Pleasant Hill. That there's also a cemetery there where several of their young people that went to war came, and there are many veterans there buried that were Pleasant Hill family.
One of the traditions at that gathering became Wallace Tea Garden. Describe what he would do. And again, he's now 97, did you say?
I think that's pretty close. I don't know that that's...
You know Wallace Tea Garden? Does anybody? He's a retired attorney and an accountant in Ames whose roots are in Grand Junction and the Pleasant Hill area.
Yes, and his family goes way back. Actually, they put the bell, we do have a bell, actually, and his father, I believe, put it up with the tractor and a pulley, put the bell up there. But for 50 years and more, Wallace would get up at this celebration and recite the Gettysburg Address and other snippets of other orations, and probably for way more than 5 minutes. But he, in the years that I've known, he was a smaller man, and he, would go up there, but he had a huge booming voice, and he would scare the children. But he was very good at what he did.
With no notes?
No notes, no, never any notes. Amazing. Yeah, and he was also, has been a staunch supporter of Pleasant Hill financially and with his ideas.
Here's the church again. This was painted by Iowa artist Zach Jones in 2017, and that's the one with their prints available. But this is the original oil right here. The site out there is tremendous. It's beautiful.
It is a Pleasant Hill.
The stagecoach route that Andy mentioned comes up here. I am sure is the same one because it crossed from the county from southeast to northwest. And you can still see the route down
The roots, yeah, the ruts, yeah.
that go through the trees, and it's marked. There's historical markers there that tell you what you're looking at there. Peg, what do you envision for Pleasant Hill in years to come? What do you want it to be?
Well, we have, like I said, we have a varied board, and we do have young people on our board, and we do have some ideas. I can't share all that we talk about. We would like to accomplish. We would like to have plumbing. There's never been any plumbing or running water there. We would like to accomplish that. We would like to have a place with a galley kitchen. We do have a basement somewhat similar to this, only much smaller, but it's the tile block, and some of that has had to be replaced. But we would like to have more weddings. We do have some weddings. We want more weddings. We'd like to have more funerals. We'd like to have, if people want to come have a birthday party there, we'd love to have some music events there too. So that's our goal, is to have it be a working part of our community.
She somehow persuades the town and country band to come and play a lot of times down there. I don't know how she gets that done, other than that she's the lead trumpet player. So, how many people are on the committee?
Oh, I'm going to say 6. I think that's pretty close without counting. So yeah, Mary Weaver is, Beth Rasmussen, Mark Rasmussen. They are not related.
Have you talked about the possibility of a National Historic Registry entry or not?
I know that was considered the board that happened before we did, which is an interesting story, but we have not looked into that, because honestly, people have been so generous to us, giving us money, that we have done, we've replaced the windows, a neighbor repainted, respackled the ceilings, a man came and replaced one of our basement walls for very little. Stuart French came and redid the floors for the cost of the materials, and all of this happened in amazing ways, and so we have not really had to do that yet.
Central Christian, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, had a summer series out there of kind of like revival services.
Yeah, kind of.
What were those like?
Yeah, those were real fun. At the time, we didn't have the pews in because we were in the process of repainting, respackling, and redoing the floors. So the pews were in the basement. So we could set up chairs wherever we wanted to, and we did. We had a great time. We'd come in, we'd have, music or singing, and just sit around in our chairs. We'd have some special speakers and just have a real casual worship time. Very nice.
Well, good luck. It's a special place. Every time I'm over at Pleasant Hill, I think to myself, I just feel like I'm one of the real roots of Greene County life right there at that wonderful church.
We do greatly appreciate the Historical Society. They have helped us with our memorial homecoming gathering, when those of us on the committee now were new to it, and not too many of the old members had come into that with us, and they have been a huge help to us to find our way. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Betty. Well, we've come to the point. We're talking here now about maybe the most amazing country church story in Greene County, and that is that we have one church left in the county regularly operating as a church. Trinity Lutheran Church of Willow Township, 2 miles maybe north of Coon Rapids, 5 miles northeast of Coon Rapids. It's between Mary and Coon Rapids, but it's also right near Dunbar Slough. If you know that, it's just basically south of Dunbar Slough. Beautiful place, sits on a hilltop. You can see for miles and miles around it. The moment has come. Are any of you brave enough to try this? The name?
No.
Okay. Well, this was not named Trinity Lutheran Church back on May 23rd, 1886, when it was incorporated by German Lutheran immigrants. It was named formally Die Deutsche Evangelische Lutherische Gemeinde Gemeinde und anonymous. That is translated as the German Evangelical Lutheran Church Trinity Congregation of the Unaltered Augsburg Confession. That probably means something to you Lutherans.
Don't ask us one. It goes way beyond 82 years.
What I've learned, I went down with church at Trinity Lutheran last Sunday. The pastor is Larry Miller, right?
Alan Miller.
Alan Miller, who's a real live wire. He could not be with us here today, or we would have had him telling this story too. But what I learned there, they still, 100 and how many years now, 130 years later, or something on that regard, about that
1886 officially.
They're still operating 30 to 50 people in church on Sundays. They have an active Sunday school. They have little kids running around. They have vacation Bible school in the summer. Cheryl Bielenberg, Ruth, Cliff Jensen. How do you do it? How is this happening? It goes in the face of everything we've heard today about country churches.
I don't know what the secret is, but we're mighty happy to be a recipient. Our young people are sticking around. Our young people are having their children baptized. We have a nucleus of really solid Lutheran-based people. There's no other Lutheran church that close. Yes, there is one in Coon Rapids, but we are not of the same denomination.
Trinity Lutheran is Missouri Synod Lutheran.
And in town, it's ELCA.
Ascension Lutheran in Coon Rapids is ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
A few years ago, we began to decline, and that's when we sought help from Peace Lutheran Church in Glidden, who was at that time the bigger church. We have, however, now taken over Peace. We are the more active, and we have the more members of Peace Lutheran Church. We probably have 100 people, but we'll have 35 to 50 people in church on Sunday mornings.
How far are people coming to go to church in the congregation? How far are they coming?
We have one family actually that comes from Jefferson, which is quite a drive. They live right out by the fairgrounds in Jefferson, so they're coming. That's probably the farthest distance, but we have Bear, we have Bagley. Where else, Cheryl? Can you think? Scranton, yeah.
Did you say Adair?
No, Bagley.
Isn't there somebody coming from Adair that works at Scranton Manufacturing?
Yeah, right. Members 2 miles south of Guthrie Center are coming. They like a country church.
Well, their church closed here a couple of years ago. So they hunted our church up. It was a country.
People like the feel of a country church. And we're active, we're modern.
You can pass the microphone around. In the centennial year, Cheryl, do you remember what year it was? You had a big celebration.
1986.
Was it 86? 1986.
Yeah.
Was that when it was that had the big event at Coon Rapids Bayard School? And tell us about who the speaker was. Do you remember?
Well, Dr. Oswald Hoffman was our speaker, and he was on the radio every Sunday with the Lutheran Hour, if any of you ever listened to that.
National radio show.
And he was, you would say, the head of the Lutheran Church, and wonderful speaker, wonderful speaker. A 2-day celebration. I will say, sometimes you think only 1 or 2 people can do anything to make something grow. And I think we've got a couple of girls in our church that got the Sunday school going, and they just go all out for the children. And our pastor does too. And I think that's one of the reasons we're growing, because they just make it so fun for the little ones. And
I noticed when I was there Sunday, it's a Missouri Synod Lutheran Church. It's rather formal. I mean, it's like the pastor is wearing, do you call that an alb? The white, long white robe and a stole. And the service is pretty traditional. Does that help?
we think it does. We think it does. Yeah, it's very traditional. Yeah.
Great. Other pastors. Are you a lifetime member?
No.
Your husband is?
Yes.
Yeah, but are you too?
I choose.
Okay.
These guys are married into the situation.
Yeah.
They married into the situation. But who, other pastors besides Pastor Alan Miller, any notables over the years?
Oh yeah, when I grew up in the 50s, we had a Pastor Stock, who I think at that time our membership grew to almost 300 people.
Whoa, what was his secret?
He was talented in organizing any fun thing. In fact, he organized events at Lake Okoboji. Just a natural. He liked to sing, he liked to play the piano, he could organize anything there was, and people. For some reason, music is an incentive, and really, people really flock to that. I had a wonderful growing up area say, from 53 to 58 or 9. And we had membership, like I said, coming from all over.
Did most of your people, were you mostly in the Coon Rapids Bayard school districts?
Yeah, basically 99%, I would say. And we've always, Bayard, Coon Rapids, they've always gotten along.
Did any big events that became regular parts of the congregation's life? I mean, annual type events?
We've always had, up until COVID took care of us, we had an annual chicken supper that we served from the Bayard Community Building. I suppose we had 400 or 500 people come to that each year. COVID took care of that, so we've decided now, most of us are in our 80s. It's gotten to be too much work. So this past year we had the 141 garage sales. We have a member that lives west of Coon Rapids and on 141. So we just gathered items from our church and the Glidden Church. We made nearly free will offering, not a price on anything, nearly $5,000.
I was amazed when I heard that figure last week, and I looked around to see if anybody else in the church seemed to be amazed, and they did not.
Oh, fabulous.
I haven't heard any churches making money like that since bingo.
So that may be our new agreement.
How do you three feel about the future? What do you think the future of Trinity Lutheran Church is going to be?
Well, it looks bright now. The thing that worries me probably more than anything is to lose Pastor Miller. I'm not sure it's going to be an easy solution to find a pastor that will be willing to serve in a associate congregation. Most of the pastors out there now are probably not going to think highly of traveling 15 miles every Sunday. So that scares me a lot. Pastor's been there since 1998, I think. So we know that we won't keep him forever.
Right.
So,
Cliff, what do you think? What do you think the future holds?
Well, I think if we can keep our young children and people, we should have a good future. And, we talk some, and they talk to younger people. And we had, their Sunday school meets, or vacation Bible school, we used to have 60, 70 kids go. Small congregations around the county and everything. So if we can keep that going, I think we should be strong.
Good. Cheryl, thoughts? Future?
I think so. Like I say, it sometimes only takes one or two people, and I think everyone here has said that. And think they will. We hope so.
Well, congratulations to you. It's a great story, and it's kind of reassuring to have one church that's still active like that and can tell that story. So thank you all very much. Anybody have any questions as we wrap up? Anybody got a favorite country church story they want to tell? Yes, Suzanne.
Hi, I would like the lot story about your parents' little church Bible that was a great all those celebrations.
Yes, several of the men in the church that were carpenters and so forth made a replica of the Greene Church in 1981, and they did it to have it in the Cooper Centennial Parade. That was in 1981. It was built to scale, and I think it's something like 1/17 of the original church, or something like that. We still have it on one of our, we keep it in the shed over in Greenbrier on one of the farms. And Doug said he thinks he's going to have it in the Bell Tower Parade next year. So we will try to revive that and keep that going.
Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you all for coming. If you want to come up and see any of the books or any of the other materials out there, you're welcome to do so. It's been a very interesting program. We thank you all, the panelists that have told your stories here, and I think they're instructive for all the different levels of operation that you're at now. So
Chuck, can I just show one thing to end with? I just want to say how nice we have it to have Roger Agater amongst us. When the Greenbrier Church was closing, Chuck and Jed McGee and Roger came down, and we offered them some things from the church for the historical building, and they were nice enough to take some of the very special things. And I think Roger heard me say over and over, oh, I should really take some wood out of this church and do something with it, but I don't know what I'd do. Probably after about the third time, he called me after the church had closed, and he said, I have something for you. And he actually had made 2 of these. So he made this for me out of wooden pieces from the church, and he made another one, and I gave that to Don and Janice Badger from the church. So thank you, Roger, and thanks to the Historical Society for taking our most special items.
It's nice. It's nice having an artist as the executive director of your Historical Society. His talent comes in handy all the time. Well, again, thank you all for coming to visit with the panelists.